Australia, a country well known for its stunning scenery and dynamic culture, has a complicated and frequently unsettling underbelly. The nation's darker side is not always at the forefront of its global image due to its history, social problems, and environmental challenges. This in-depth analysis explores Australia's complex dark side, including its colonial past, racial prejudice, environmental degradation, crime and violence, mental health issues, economic disparities, immigration detention policies, and drug misuse. Come along with me as I discuss and examine these negative aspects. If you haven't already, subscribe now. Thank you for subscribing. Also like and hit the notification bell to get notified on every of our videos. Now let's explore Australia's darker aspects. Initially, the colonization of Australia is closely linked to its sordid past. Before European settlers arrived, the region was home to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who had developed intricate communities with rich cultural customs and strong spiritual attachments to the land. For these indigenous tribes, a time of great upheaval began with the British invasion in 1788. The indigenous people were wiped out by a wave of violence, sickness, and forced relocation brought on by colonization. Claiming territory that had been tended to by indigenous Australians for tens of thousands of years, European settlers spread over the continent. Many indigenous people were slain or forced from their lands as a result of the violent battles that frequently accompanied this expansion. The policy of forced integration is among the most sad features of this history. The Australian government imposed measures in the 19th and 20th centuries with the intention of eradicating indigenous customs and assimilating Aboriginal children into European society. The taking of Aboriginal children away from their families, known as the Stolen Generations, was the most notorious of these measures. These kids were sent to white households or institutions, where they frequently faced discrimination and attempts to erase their cultural identity. These past injustices' effects are still felt today. When compared to non-Indigenous Australians, Indigenous people in Australia experience severe socioeconomic disadvantages. This entails worse health outcomes, a shorter life expectancy, and greater rates of incarceration. Deep scars from colonization persist, and attempts to heal these divisions and bring about reconciliation are still difficult. Racial discrimination is one of Australia's other dark sides. Australia's widespread problem of racial discrimination undermines the country's reputation as a multicultural haven. Even though Australia appears to be committed to diversity, there are pervasive prejudices that have a big impact on different cultures. Systemic racism has an especially negative effect on Indigenous Australians. Numerous injustices that have their roots in past wrongdoing still affect these communities today. Because of a history of prejudice and neglect, Indigenous Australians frequently have worse health outcomes than their non-Indigenous counterparts. These issues are made worse by educational inequality, which results in higher dropout rates and poorer academic attainment for Indigenous students. Indigenous Australians regularly face obstacles to work in the labor market, which feeds the cycles of poverty and social injustice. The fact that the government's attempts to resolve these problems have not yet been able to close the gap shows how pervasive the discrimination that Indigenous Australians experience. The diversity of Australia's multicultural landscape is also reflected in the discrimination experienced by various racial and ethnic minorities. Prejudice that takes many different forms is something that new immigrants from countries like China, India, and the Middle East frequently encounter. Stereotypes and unfavorable opinions can be strengthened by media portrayals, and hiring practices that discriminate against certain groups can restrict their access to jobs. These groups become even more isolated due to social marginalization, which makes community creation and integration more challenging. Furthermore, inherent racial biases are shown by the contentious character of Australia's immigration policies. The public conversation around migrants and asylum seekers frequently displays a range of opinions, from sympathy to downright hate. This argument encompasses not only policy but also societal perceptions and treatment of immigrants. Asylum seekers are often the target of mistrust and hostility, which can worsen alienation sentiments within immigrant communities and make it more difficult for them to integrate and feel accepted. These forms of racial discrimination have substantial negative effects on society as large. They exacerbate social fragmentation by encouraging distinct communities to lead parallel lifestyles as opposed to cohesive ones. This division has the potential to erode Australia's very multicultural culture and impede social cohesiveness. Although diversity is closely linked to Australia's identity, many of its citizens continue to face racial inequity and prejudice in their daily lives. In order to address these problems, policy changes alone won't be enough. Society as a whole must be more committed to facing and eliminating the prejudices that threaten the country's aspirations of inclusion and equality. One other crucial thing to think about is environmental degradation. Furthermore, Australia has a dark side. Australia is known for its stunning natural surroundings, but it also faces serious environmental problems. In addition to the well-known Great Barrier Reef, the nation is home to several rainforests and huge dry regions, among other distinctive and diversified ecosystems. But a variety of environmental problems have put these natural treasures in grave danger. Dying reefs with coral bleaching. Currently undergoing significant coral bleaching occurrences is the Great Barrier Reef, one of the largest coral reef systems in the world, stressed by high water temperatures. Bleaching happens when corals push out the symbiotic algae that live inside their tissues. These temperature rises are mostly caused by climate change, which also causes widespread bleaching and eventual coral destruction. Marine biodiversity is greatly impacted by the destruction of the reef because it serves as vital habitat for many different species. Deforestation. Australia has seen a considerable amount of deforestation, especially in the state of Queensland, where substantial tracts of forest have been removed for development and agriculture. Deforestation reduces carbon sequestration, which affects climate control, and adds to habitat loss, which affects animals like koalas. The water quality in rivers and streams is further impacted by soil erosion and increased runoff caused by land removal. Bushfires in Australia. The frequency and severity of bushfires have grown recently, with the 2019 to 2020 blaze season being especially destructive. Known as the Black Summer, this season brought with it extraordinary fires that drastically increased air pollution, devastated enormous tracts of land, and killed or displaced millions of animals. Climate change makes conditions hotter and drier, which prolongs and intensifies fire seasons, increasing the risk of bushfires. Mining and resource extraction. Mining is a major contributor to Australia's economy, but it also has a big environmental impact. Open-pit mining, which can result in landscape damage, biodiversity loss, and water contamination, is frequently used in the extraction of minerals like coal, iron ore, and gold. Furthermore, the coal industry has come under fire for its involvement in the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Water shortage. Overuse of water resources and climate change are two major factors that are making water shortage worse. One of Australia's most important agricultural areas, the Murray-Darling Basin, has seen severe water shortages as a result of protracted droughts and excessive irrigation water consumption. The productivity of agriculture is impacted by these water shortages, endangering farmers' lives. Violent crimes. There is a dark side to Australia, but one that isn't often talked about. Australia experiences its fair share of crime and violence, which has a substantial social impact, even if its crime rates are generally lower than those of other nations. Domestic violence with high incidence rates of reported cases and profound effects on victims and communities. Domestic violence is a serious issue in Australia. Domestic violence affects women disproportionately and can have serious long-term implications on one's physical and mental well-being. Legal changes and expanded support services are two ways this problem is being addressed, but it is still difficult to guarantee victims receive enough safety and assistance. Drug misuse is becoming a bigger concern in Australia, where drugs including cannabis, opiates, and methamphetamines are linked to a number of social and health issues. In particular, methamphetamine usage has skyrocketed in recent years, contributing to a rise in crime and health problems. Despite not being as bad as in some other nations, the opioid crisis is nonetheless a cause for concern due to increased rates of overdose deaths and prescription drug usage. Criminal activity. Gang-related crime, which involves criminal groups engaged in violent crime, drug trafficking, and extortion, is a problem in several urban areas. Although gang activity is not as widespread as it is in some other nations, it nonetheless poses difficulties for public safety and law enforcement. With rising rates of mental illnesses and suicides, mental health concerns are also a major concern in Australia. This crisis is caused by a number of circumstances, such as the demands of modern life, social isolation, and socioeconomic difficulties. High suicide rates among developed countries. Australia has one of the highest suicide rates, which is especially concerning for vulnerable populations like men, young people, and Indigenous Australians. A comprehensive strategy is needed to address suicide, a significant public health concern, which includes better mental health services, assistance for at-risk groups, and efforts to lessen stigma. Mental health disorders, bipolar disorder, anxiety and depression, are among the mental health conditions that are becoming more common. These problems are exacerbated by the stresses of modern living, such as social isolation and economic insecurity. It is important for people to have access to mental health treatments, but obstacles like availability, cost, and stigma may keep them from getting the care they need. Indigenous mental health. Due to their greater rates of psychological distress and substance misuse, Indigenous Australians have particular mental health issues. These problems are exacerbated by past trauma, current discrimination, and socioeconomic disadvantages. To address these issues, culturally competent mental health care and support are crucial. Australia is a wealthy country, yet there is one important and unsettling feature of its environment: economic disparity. Even with the country's general prosperity and high standard of living, many people and localities are nonetheless impacted by glaring economic discrepancies. Despite having a higher quality of life than many other affluent countries, Australia has a concerning disparity in wealth and income distribution. Even though it's not as high as in some other nations, a sizable portion of the population is nevertheless affected by poverty. Many Australians experience economic instability as a result of low salaries, underemployment, and unemployment combined. These problems are made worse by a labor market that frequently fails to offer sufficient pay or steady work to everyone, making it difficult for some people to satisfy their most basic need. Living expenses in big cities like Sydney and Melbourne have skyrocketed. Particularly difficult are high housing costs, which put pressure on lower-income households' budgets due to growing real estate and rental rates. Rising pricing for products and services compound this financial strain. The difficulty in finding cheap accommodation has grown to be a major concern, adding to the rising issue of homelessness and housing affordability. Many Australians are caught in a vicious loop whereby the cost of basic living needs is increasing faster than their earnings can keep up. Compared to other nations, Australia has rather substantial social mobility, yet this opportunity is not dispersed equally. The degree to which a person can improve their financial situation depends largely on factors including educational attainment, socioeconomic standing, and resource accessibility. It may be very difficult for people from underprivileged origins to get a good education and professional possibilities, which might impede upward mobility and prolong poverty cycles. While Australia is perceived by many as a country of opportunity and wealth, many see a country characterized by economic disparity. There is an urgent need to address these concerns and move towards a more equal society because of the disparity in wealth and income, the burden of rising living expenses, and the uneven accessibility to social mobility. Australia's immigration laws have drawn a lot of discussion and criticism, especially in relation to how they treat refugees and asylum seekers. And yet another revealed facet of Australia's harmful side: centers for offshore detention. Human rights organizations have strongly criticized Australia's practice of holding asylum seekers in offshore facilities. Manus Island detention facilities in Papua New Guinea and Nauru have come under fire for their appalling living circumstances, which include low living conditions overall, no access to legal representation, and insufficient health care. Detainees in these facilities are suffering from serious mental and physical health problems as a result of the conditions there. Evidence of self-harm, mental health emergencies, and insufficient medical attention underscores the human cost associated with these practices. These incarceration tactics remain a controversial topic in spite of legal challenges and worldwide criticism. The discussion surrounding immigration detention frequently mirrors larger xenophobic and national security concerns. Strict detention laws are seen as cruel and ineffective by some, while others contend that they are vital for border control. This separation brings to light the ongoing immigration and asylum-related issues in Australian society. In Australia, drug misuse is a serious problem that affects crime, public health, and social stability. Methamphetamine use, especially with ice or crystal meth, has increased recently. This extremely addictive substance has been connected to an upsurge in criminal activity, including theft and violent crimes. Methamphetamine usage has serious negative effects on one's health, including psychological disorders, physical health issues, and a significant risk of overdosing. The opioid crisis: prescription opioid misuse has increased in Australia, albeit at a slower pace than the opioid crisis in the US. As a result, there have been more cases of addiction, overdoses, and associated health problems. Stricter prescription laws and more funding for addiction treatment programs are two measures taken to address this epidemic. To address drug usage and reduce the risks associated with it, Australia has established a number of harm reduction methods, including supervised injecting centers and needle exchange programs. Despite obstacles and resistance from a variety of sources, these initiatives seek to lessen the negative effects that drug use has on one's health and society. The darker facets of Australia's reality frequently stand in stark contrast to the country's image as an affluent and progressive one. These difficulties, which range from historical injustices to current societal ills, paint a complicated and diverse image of the nation. Taking care of these problems is essential to creating a society that is more just and equal. If you find this information helpful, please subscribe to this channel, like and share this video also. Hit the notification bell to get notified our next and newest videos. This information is brought to you by Stargaze.